After winning the Big Ten opener, the revenge tour for the Michigan Wolverines begins. The first stop, a home date with the Northwestern Wildcats. Welcome to episode 6 of Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. I'm your host, Andrew Hammond, assistant sports editor at the Detroit Free Press. On this journey, we will take you game by game, week by week, to give you the inside look at how the 1997 Michigan Wolverines captured their share of a national title. This week, Michigan hosts the Northwestern Wildcats, one of a handful of teams that's given the Wolverines trouble in recent seasons. After picking up a shutout victory over Indiana, the Michigan Wolverines are ranked 6th and riding high in conference play. This week's big matchup in the Big Ten is in State College between Penn State and Ohio State. It is the lone top 10 matchup of the weekend, a weekend where 5 teams in the top 10 go on the road. The major question is, will all of them survive? The Wolverines' string of top 10 matchups would be saved for later in the season. If you want the complete story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines, the Free Press is publishing a commemorative book. Hail Yes, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines can be purchased at um.pictorial.mybook.com. If Michigan's football history is rich, then Northwestern's is destitute and poor. However, it is the Wildcats who are basking in the glow of more immediate success under head coach Gary Barnett. In 1995, the Wildcats put together perhaps one of the greatest Cinderella stories in the history of college football, winning the Big Ten title and playing in the Rose Bowl, or any bowl, for the first time since New Year's Day 1949. The Wildcats will be back in a bowl game the following season, reaching the Citrus Bowl. Coming into the 1997 contest, Northwestern had won 2 straight against the Wolverines and were looking to make it a third. When we come back, I am joined by Keith Gave, former Michigan beat writer at the Free Press. We will break down Northwestern versus Michigan after this break. This is Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. Welcome back to Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. I'm your host, Andrew Hammond. I'm joined this week by Keith Gave, former Michigan beat writer at the Free Press. Keith, I was looking in the archives doing research for the show, and in the lead up to the game, you wrote a column on how Lloyd Carr's patience with Brian Griese was starting to pay off. If you could, can you speak about just how vital that relationship was for both coach and quarterback?
Well, I sure will, Andrew. First of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, to describe me as a Michigan beat writer is accurate, I guess, but a little bit of a stretch. The way I see it, I babysat the beat for a year, for a season, I should say. We were going through some staffing changes at the Free Press. We lost some people, including my good friend Corky Meineke, the NBA beat writer, that spring, and we were shuffling the deck. And our sports editor at the time, Gene Myers, asked me if I could fill in covering Michigan football for that season. I didn't realize how lucky I was till about halfway through the season when they couldn't lose. But anyways, get to your question between Lloyd Carr and Brian Griese, trust is the most important issue between a coach and a quarterback. And I don't think it came easily to the coach, especially Brian Griese came back to the team with some baggage. As you remember, he had the incident in the bar and left the team for a while and worked his way back. And game after game, you could see it develop, the trust between the coach and the quarterback. It was tested a little bit, especially in the next week's game against Iowa. But listen, it was almost an unbreakable bond between those two. It was an unbreakable bond, and it was it was fascinating to watch unfold. With every game, Brian Griese just seemed to get more and more and more confidence, and with every game, Lloyd Carr just I guess trust again is the word, leaned on his quarterback to get them through some really difficult moments that were still ahead of them this coming season.
That's fascinating because in how Michigan football is now, you had head coach Jim Harbaugh basically kind of shuffling quarterbacks, and Lloyd Carr does that in a few seasons. But at the same time, it seems like he's hitched his wagon to Brian Griese, and he's like, hey, if we're going to do something, you're going to be the guy to do it. And now, as you said, that trust is starting, and the confidence for Brian is starting to grow more and more.
And it's not like Lloyd Carr didn't have other options. He had Scott Dreisbach, who was the starter the previous season, and he had a young guy on that team named Tom Brady who hadn't emerged yet as a serious contender for the job. But that's what Lloyd Carr did, I think, best in his coaching career at Michigan, was develop quarterbacks, guys who went on to the NFL to have remarkable success.
For sure. And the first half would see a trio of field goals, two of them by Michigan, to make the score 6-3. Before halftime, Michigan would reach the end zone once again. This time it's Brian Griese connecting with Jerame Tuman for a touchdown to make the score 13-3. We've talked about other members of the Michigan offense throughout the series, but Jerame Tuman, he would play a major role in the title run down the road. But what do you remember about his time in Ann Arbor?
I just remember that every time, it seemed like every single time Michigan needed a big play, Jerame Tuman was involved somehow, some way. He was kind of like Brian Griese's security blanket. Whenever he needed to do something, third and long, and he's scrambling around. How does he find Jerame Tuman? He did it at the end of this game, by the way. It's like they're 2 yards away from the end zone. Brian Griese drops back to pass, and suddenly there's a Northwestern guy gets him in a bear hug. Looks like he's going down at about the 15-yard line. Somehow Griese does a Houdini, gets out of that, and there he stands, Jerame Tuman, wide open in the end zone for an easy touchdown, put the game away. I mean, we saw that time after time after time. And Jerame Tuman, I'm glad you mentioned him, Andrew, is one of the really unheralded, unappreciated players from that team. I really like that kid, and he did some very important things for that team that season.
For sure, and because you think about the tight ends and some of the more unheralded skill position guys in, I would say, from the 90s to the present, to me, he's up there with a Benny Joperu or some of these other receivers that have come along and been, really good, like as you said, security blankets in terms of, okay, if it's a 2nd and 6 or a third and 5, I know I can hit Tuman on an out route, boom. We move the sticks. But that's one of the things I was really impressed about with this team, that they had one or two guys that could do that every single game. But when we come back, Charles Woodson comes up big once again for the Michigan defense when Road to the Victors returns after this break. We are back with Road to the Victors, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines. Michigan gets a late field goal in the third quarter to make the score 13-6. In the fourth quarter, Michigan would slam the door on Northwestern. Brian Griese connects with Jerame Tuman, as Keith had described it so perfectly, gets in a bear hug, does a Houdini act, finds Tuman in the end zone, and basically the game is over. On the following drive for the Wildcats, Charles Woodson would essentially end all chances for a Northwestern comeback, collecting his third interception of the season and second week in a row getting a pick. Now, the Heisman race isn't really much of a story right now at this point, but things are starting to take shape. at some point, it's going to start gaining traction. Did you feel like this was the point that Woodson's Heisman run, maybe people aren't talking about it enough? Because I know we have Michigan State down the road, but at the same time, Charles Woodson is making so many plays for the Wolverines 5 games into the season. Were you starting to think, okay, he could do something special?
Yes, Andrew. Until about then, people were, they included Charles Woodson in the Heisman conversation as almost like a sort of a gimmick or something. Nobody really took it seriously. He was a long shot at best, obviously primarily a defensive player. But Lloyd Carr is starting to use him, insert him on the offense a little bit, receiving, running plays, and on special teams, obviously. Doing amazing things with the football on both sides of the line of scrimmage and on special teams. And it was that game, I think, that not just me, but a lot of other people started thinking, maybe this guy has a shot. And he just kept getting better and better. The plays he was making, you mentioned Michigan State coming up and that one catch that he made, the guy was in both college and the NFL, a tremendous football player. And you could see the bandwagon getting bigger and bigger and bigger with talking about Charles Woodson for the Heisman Trophy. And I'm jumping ahead of myself, and I apologize for this, but I was lucky enough to be at the Downtown Athletic Club in New York at the end of the season to watch Charles Woodson win that Heisman Trophy.
It's one of those controversial Heisman moments. I'm sure I would love to get your thoughts on it when we get there, because I feel like it's not talked about enough, that moment specifically. But Michigan would go on to beat Northwestern 23-6. They're now 5-0 in 1997. Keith, they made it through the lesser teams of the Big Ten. You have Northwestern and Indiana. But beginning with Iowa, you have this gauntlet of road tests. You have this gauntlet of ranked teams. Are you feeling like this Wolverines team is special, or much like Woodson's Heisman a bit, there's still, maybe the bandwagon is gathering and you're still wondering, okay, can they conquer XYZ down the road?
Well, I agree with you that they had just been through a fairly easy part of their schedule. They did it in a dominating fashion, obviously. But to be honest with you, I thought this team was capable of something special after the opening game of the season in Ann Arbor, when the number one team in the land, Colorado, came to Ann Arbor, and Michigan beat them 30-3 or something like that. They just completely dominated the team that was the preseason favorite. And then they just kept winning, but not it's not the fact that they kept winning, Andrew, but it's how they kept winning with that defense of theirs. Defense wins championships. Northwestern was the fourth time in 5 games that the defense didn't allow a touchdown. When you play like that, you can beat anybody. And they would certainly they would be tested, but Jim Herman, the rookie defensive coordinator that year, just did a remarkable job with that unit. It was special to watch. And as Brian Griese said after this game, hey, our offense feeds off the defense. When we're struggling, we let the defense go out there and do their thing, and we are inspired by our defense. And it was kind of a neat thing to watch up close, like I was able to do for that season.
While Michigan rolled, what happened to those 5 top 10 teams that went on the road on Saturday? Number 2 Penn State beat number 7 Ohio State 31-27. Number 3 Nebraska beat Baylor 49-21. Number 4 Florida State blasted Duke 51-27. And number 9 Tennessee beat Georgia 38-13. And the final and most important game of the weekend, defending national champion and number 1 Florida falls to LSU 28-21. The Tigers' victory over the Gators was the first time LSU had upset the number 1 team in the country. The loss also ended 2 long streaks for the Gators in SEC play. a 25-game conference winning streak, and a 19-game road winning streak in the SEC all went up in smoke. That means there's a new number one team in the country, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Where are the Michigan Wolverines ranked at this week? Number 5. And they are hosting number 15 Iowa next week. Before we go, our guest has been Keith Gave. Anjanette Delgado and Kirkland Crawford are the executive producers of this podcast. Kerry Jr. II provides technical support. Peter Bhatia is the editor of the Detroit Free Press. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Road to the Victors on Apple, Spotify, or your preferred streaming app of choice. And find us at freep.com/podcast. Please subscribe, leave a rating, and tell your friends about us. It really does mean a lot. For more information on the 1997 Michigan team, pre-order the book Hail Yes, the story of the 1997 Michigan Wolverines at freep.com. I'm Andrew Hammond, and we'll see you next week.